Always fair, but fairly opinionated. Ottawa starts its morning with Mark Sutcliffe. Welcome in to Ottawa Today on 1310 News.
Welcome back to Ottawa Today on this Wednesday morning. Thank you for joining us. In about half an hour from now, Canadian Olympian from Eganville, Melissa Bishop, is going to join us. She came fourth in the 800 meters at Rio, of course, and has a big parade coming in Eganville on the weekend. We'll talk about what's next in her career. We are joined every Wednesday at this time by Elliot Tepper from Carleton University. We talk about all the big stories in international affairs, and it seems like every week there is, of course, something to talk about in the U.S. election, and I think that's not going to change between now and the end of the year. Elliot, welcome back. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mark. It's really a starting over day, isn't it? The day after Labor Day, the week after Labor Day is like a new year.
Yeah.
Everything picks up.
I always think of this as the beginning of the year, really. When I do all of my own sort of planning, and it's not, for me, it's not January 1st. It's really September 1st.
I think maybe it's a school year.
Yeah.
Anyway, something clicks in starting now. So it's a good time. It's a stock-taking day.
Sure.
Where are we? Well, we know, yes, we probably have an election watch every week because till November 3rd anyway, and maybe even the swearing in January. That's an ongoing story. We also have our Prime Minister wandering the world again. We should probably come back to that. And, it's Wednesday. Where's your Prime Minister today?
Yeah.
So some very interesting things coming out of the G20 and out of his trip to Asia. It might be useful to remind ourselves of the guidelines we've been using because we've been covering, you and I, this election since the earliest primaries. So we've had kind of three guidelines and a maxim for guiding us through this because it helps organize all the miscellaneous stuff. A lot is happening, and how do you make sense of it? And the first is, the name of the game is to depress your opponent's base and raise up your own base. Keep your own base lively, keep the other base at home. Yeah. And that's a key maxim in politics. A second one is, you'd think this is obvious. Elections are won by the people who show up to vote.
Right.
And if you think that's too obvious, ask the Brexit people in England. They thought, the Remain side had it in the bag, but their people didn't show up. Their side did. And thirdly, it's something we need to talk more about, and today we get a chance, is that this is, in a sense, the day of the dispossessed. A lot is happening in the world that is bubbling up around those who have been the losers, those who are left behind, those who are left out, those who feel hard done by globalization, by free trade. And that certainly is roiling not only the election campaign we're talking about, but the politics of the West altogether, the rise of the populist parties. And finally, there's kind of a maxim. The maxim is this: elections and other things really go to the people who are best organized. Or to put another way, organization beats disorganization almost every time.
Right.
And those kind of overviews are a great way to kind of organize the day-to-day stuff because polls go up, polls go down. Where's the poll today, Mark?
Yeah, it's close. So why is it close? Why has Donald Trump closed the gap? Because a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about how Hillary Clinton had a 85% chance of winning the election. Now it's down to about 2/3. It's around 67%.
We have, again, day after Labor Day is when the serious election season theoretically starts. It's really almost 61 days. So 61 days from now, the vote and the debate is coming up. Why? I think it's because of the things we're talking about. Donald Trump only needed to become competitive by consolidating Republicans to vote for the Republican candidate.
Yeah.
Hillary had a much better record of consolidating even the Bernie supporters behind herself, whereas so what we're seeing now is a consolidation. The Republicans are realizing they've only got one candidate, that's Donald Trump. You had a choice between running away from him, which a lot of Republicans have been doing. Well, for example, the governor of Ohio didn't show up at the convention. The Republican government in Ohio, John Kasich, who arguably could have been on the ticket, didn't even show up. So what we have here is the Republicans are starting to come together, and we see that in some of the numbers. But another thing that's happening, and this is less visible, and it's harder to find, by the way, is that the independent vote has been splitting and trending toward Trump and away from Hillary Clinton. When you put those two things together, you have a sudden bump. Now, the pundits are saying, well, we should go back to that 538. You know, he was 50-50 right after the Republican convention.
Yeah.
He dropped down to 11% after the Democrats had their convention. So they're saying, well, her souffle, her post-convention bump has just come back to normal. She's still leading. It's comfortable. It's 4% if you can maintain that. My feeling, Mark, is that this election has not broken yet. It's been hovering. This election is Hillary's to lose. There's no question about it. She's got all the right things in place. Donald Trump goes out of his way to chase away voters. That is, her base goes up as he panders to his base, which isn't big enough to win the general, but meanwhile he inflates her base. So one of the things that we have going on now is that Hillary Clinton's unfavorables have gone up again. So we have two wildly unpopular candidates running against each other. What's it going to come down to? It reminds me somewhat of our own election last time when the polls were all over the place and finally the election broke. One day almost, you can almost measure it, when we had a three-party race that suddenly went, and this is one of the great untold stories of our own last election, suddenly it split. And it split for the Liberals, the third place party, not for the New Democrats, not the second place. So it was over, game over when that broke. Are we going to have that breaking point in this election? This election can be a landslide either way.
Right. And it's still not clear what this election will end up being about.
Yes.
Right? What the deciding factor will be, what the ballot question will be. Maybe for some people it's this thirst for change and this kind of anti-establishment sort of mentality, but for a lot of people it's still not clear what they are voting for or voting against.
It's clearly, we've talked about this right from day one, this is a day when a change candidate has the edge. Time for a change is a great slogan, 8 years Democrats in office. It was really the Republicans' parties to lose until they nominated Donald Trump. It now comes down to stay with what you know because it's safe, Hillary Clinton, or go for the change we desire as a country, the dystopia in Washington, which the Republican Party helped create, and now they've got a Donald Trump who comes to fill it and they don't know what to do with him. So it comes down to do we get the change or do we stay safe? And that's all of the advertising that you're going to see from now on. Also, one thing that I think has been underappreciated is the message of Donald Trump, believe it or not, seems to be taking effect. Not just his bombast and his name-calling, but he talks about jobs. And he goes to places that says, I'm going to bring back the jobs, which takes us back to the globalization issue. Globalization has taken away your job. Free trade has taken away your jobs. I'm going to reverse all that. And Hillary Clinton has turned around, a traditional free trader, and said, no, I'm against free trade as well, which has a big implication for us here in Canada because NAFTA, after all, and our prime minister was just in Asia saying, we believe in free trade.
Yeah. You say it can be a landslide either way, but one of the dynamics of American politics is that there are a lot of people who are going to vote Republican and a lot of people are going to vote Democrat. So the kind of landslide we saw in past elections isn't really possible in modern America right now. A big win would be somebody winning by 6 or 7 points right now, not by 10 or 20, right?
This thing about it not having broken, if we see the race carry out as we see it today, the Democrats are going to win by a comfortable margin, perhaps the equivalent to what Obama took against the Republicans last time. She's got the Obama coalition going for her, plus all those people that can't stand Donald Trump.
Yeah.
If it goes steady as she goes, it's going to be that. But something could flip this election. The unfavorables that have clung to her, if something happens, if a health issue happens, maybe a terrorist attack, who knows, it could flip. And also, it's been Teflon Donald. Nothing has stuck to Donald Trump. Millions of advertising have been spent by his Republican opponents. It didn't matter. He wiped them out. So something breaking through that Teflon, that could change it. But right now, if it stays with the way we see it, it is neck and neck. It could go either way narrowly. It could go more logically, the Democrats in a comfortable majority, but it could go either way.
Elliot Tepper is with us every Wednesday on Ottawa Today. Coming up, we're going to talk about some of the dynamics around the G20 summit that Justin Trudeau just attended, and his visit to China as well. Lots of interesting storylines coming up there. And then at 11:30, we'll be joined by Melissa Bishop of Eganville, just back from the Rio Olympics.
You're listening to
Back to Ottawa Today. We'll be joined in just a few minutes by Canadian Olympian Melissa Bishop of Eganville. Elliot Tepper is with us every Wednesday on Ottawa Today, talking about the big international stories, including the American presidential election. And current U.S. President Barack Obama, of course, was at the G20 summit.
Yes, indeed.
There was a little almost international incident over how he was welcomed there. They didn't like, the White House, I guess, didn't like the way things were set up. And then he went off to the Philippines, and was some hostility there from the Philippine president, which he later apologized for. So interesting times for Obama in Asia. But let's look at the G20 summit and what actually gets accomplished at gatherings like this, and what Justin Trudeau's goals might have been.
We should probably focus on our own prime minister for a bit and then broaden it out indeed to what this is all about. Our prime minister has gone to his second G20. He was, first of all, as we talked about, there on a bilateral visit, and that could be of highly qualified success. That is, he saw all the right people, both on the political side, but also he saw the key business people. He showed the Canadian flag. He did his soft power selfie thing, very popular indeed. So on that ground, it was good. He did not get either there or, that is, on the bilateral visit or during the G20 sidelines, he did not get any progress on key things for Canadians. Yes, he got some success, a postponement on the Chinese freezing out the canola market. That's a $2 billion ticket item for Canada. And basically a non-tariff barrier was put in place by China to keep out our canola. He managed successfully to get that finessed, but he didn't get our Canadians out of jail, nor was there any progress made there, or in a couple other states where he talked to the leaders and there's Canadians in jail. These are really about face-to-face time with world leaders. It's relationship building, and this is important, not only generally speaking. Our prime minister is now a familiar face with all the key leaders in the world. The G20, let us remind ourselves, we're already a member not only of the UN, but also of NATO and of the G7. And these are really the power points in global politics. But the G20 was meant to be the economic club, which could, because it had all the big players in it, beyond just the G7, G8 at one point. And there, Canada is a player. We get to know all the right people, and there's a lot of sideline meetings, a lot of meetings where we get face-to-face time, both officially and unofficially, some good meetings held there. The G20 potentially is indeed, and this is a Paul Martin Canadian invention, a way to coordinate the policies of the big players in the economies of the world. What were they focusing on, and how did we do? The focus this year, and this is China's coming out party. This was China's, in effect, the counterpart to the Olympics.
Right.
The Olympics said, hey, we are a big power, and they spent also billions, not so many, saying we're a political power. We've arrived. Everybody pay attention to us, so they put billions into saying we're going to run a successful summit, and the G20 under Chinese leadership will focus on turning, as they put it, turning a talk shop into an action team. The key to me is that this G20 really focused, Mark, on fighting back against the forces of anti-globalization, anti-free trade, and our prime minister was front and center saying, yes, this is our goal. It's the same as the G20's goals. We have seen a revolt of the dispossessed. We saw it in Brexit. We've seen it other places. And this G20 was meant to be a stopper. It was meant to say, okay, all the major economies say, no, it's all a good thing, globalization, But I think the biggest takeaway from all of what happened at the G20 was that it focused on inclusive, not sustainable only, which they've talked about, innovative, yes, inclusive growth is finally dawning on the world. We may be at some kind of an inflection point from the entire thrust of the post-World War II economic order, which was toward liberalization.
Yeah.
And that liberal order has been brilliantly successful for Canada and others, but there's a cost. And finally, the G20, with our Prime Minister participating, is coming to grips with the cost.
In a matter of days, it will be the 15th anniversary of September 11th.
Indeed.
2001. First
Indeed.
of all, I can't believe it's been 15 years.
Yes, we all remember. Where were you on that day?
And that is something that I think continues to shape international matters these days, isn't it? I mean, 15 years later, it's still having an impact. The ripples are still being felt from that.
We face a world which was transformed on that day. The leadership of the United States kind of came into focus on that day and divided the world into those who were for us and those who were against us. And there's a lot of that still going on. The whole notion of the nature of the threat has changed from traditional armies to, combating over maybe resources or something else, territory, to an existential threat to all countries based on non-state actors who can wield that kind of enormous power. And it shifts the thinking of how the world works. One of the things to come out of the G20, I think, and you mentioned this in passing, was how was Obama treated? Some of the key things that will shape our world to come, after 9/11 in particular, and I want to remind ourselves that we still have a nuclear threat. Well, we come back to that over and over, is the relationship as it shifts between the United States and China, United States and Russia, Canada and Asia, the rise of Asia. We have to now maneuver in a world which has the collapse of the Middle East, all that state system which was artificial and propped up by dictatorships of one type or another has come apart as you and I are watching, as all of us are reading about it. And all of that is coming apart. Asia is rising. We've had a 9/11 attack. The nuclear threat remains, and that's the challenge for Canada and for all of us as we face, after Labor Day, this new season.
Yeah. And when you look at the dynamics, I mean, we went from having the Cold War and this sort of these two superpowers in the world to having one superpower. 10 years from now, is that going to be different? Are we going to see, is China going to emerge, or is Asia going to emerge as the other superpower?
We had an artificial unipolar world in our vocabulary of political science after the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall in 1989 and collapse of the Soviet Union. What had been a bipolar world, two states which organized the whole rest of the world around their interest, all of that suddenly went away. We've gotten too used to that. That is not the norm in international relations.
Yeah.
The world is not normally organized that way. We now have it closer and closer to a multipolar world. Beyond doubt, the United States is the major military power, but in a world where military power in a traditional sense, as we're seeing with the rise of ISIS after 9/11, is not just the only kind of power. And we see the rise of Asia. We have India, which has the fastest growing economy in the world right now, and over 1 billion people. Canada's population of 35 million is a rounding error in those kinds of demographics. So we have a lot of changing demographics. The rise of the middle class in China, and you have to give the Chinese government full marks. They've taken more people out of poverty than anybody in history. But China, you can't get along without them, and it's hard to get along with them, as we're discovering. All of these things are the major movers and shakers in a changing world, and we have to be a nimble player. Canada has joined with China to come out of the G20. What did we get? We've quietly got several institutional connections, but we also joined the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, alternative institutions China is setting up. We cannot insult our American partners. It's a tricky time in foreign policy.
And we'll be talking more about it in the weeks ahead. Elliot, thank you.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next week. Elliot Tepper, who's with us every week from Carleton University. Coming up.